I see a lot of things in my practice. I am never bored of my work. It always excites me. But let's dial back a little bit, right? This is a raw and unscripted video of my story, why I do what I do, and why I love what I do. And also some of the most common pain points that I see with people, especially couples and also individuals who are trying to relate to the other. So, my name is Viv Can. I'm a mindfulness coach in the workplace and a mindful intimacy coach in the bedroom. My job is to help high performers connect better in the bedroom and in the boardroom. I think growing up, I was probably one of the very few people, or maybe the only person in my friends group that came from a divorced family. So I was born in Hong Kong, raised in Toronto, and my parents moved to Canada to give us a better life. And because of the challenges of the distance with the relationship, because my father was in Hong Kong, mainly for work, and my mother was raising me and my sister in Canada by herself, although we did have support and we had relatives there. And also, there was a lot of really safe masculine figures in and around my life, even though my father was traveling back and forth a lot. I felt like I had a very good childhood. And I think most people will say that they had a good childhood. And looking back as an adult, I think that there were definitely many moments where it was quite traumatic for a child, not because of anyone's fault, but just because of the nature of how we were living and the family dynamic. So when we were growing up in Toronto, I really saw as a 12-year-old back then how my parents' relationship was deteriorating. I don't think I've ever really saw my parents hug, maybe once. I've never seen my parents kiss or hold hands much, actually. So when I was 12, I really saw that my parents' divorce was coming. And it was no surprise when it happened. And it really made me rebellious. I was definitely a bit of a nightmare as a tween/teenager. I really commend my parents for dealing with me back then. I was still a good student. I would say overall, I turned out quite well. But yeah, I definitely would not want to be my own mother. So thanks, Mom. And so when you can feel, as a child, you can feel whether or not your home has a cohesiveness, has a sense of security and love, and support. And I'm not saying that I didn't have any of that, but there was definitely many rocky moments, especially with my mom being in survival mode, my dad also being in survival mode, trying to be financially responsible for the family. And it's not easy growing up in a foreign country as an immigrant. So there was a lot of things going on. And as a child, you can only understand so much, but you can feel a lot. And at the same time, I think when the divorce and the separation was happening, I was definitely numbing myself. We were taught to not cry. We had to be strong. And I think a lot of Chinese women, especially, grew up with a very thick skin, just the way that the culture is. I mean, that's a whole other video. But it was definitely one of the parts of my life when my parents were going through the separation where I just didn't know how to process emotions. It was numbing. Started drinking when I was 16 or so, went out a lot, and I spent a lot of time just being with my friends because I felt really safe with my friends group. And when I look back, if I really were to look back at my parents' relationship, there were so many things that they could have done to save the marriage. And I think back then there was such a big stigma about therapy. Like, I don't think therapy was even a word in our household. And so whether it's therapy, whether it's counseling, whether it's seeking a coach, or just even doing workshops to better their relationship, that was not at all top of mind. Now we are so lucky that we have such an abundance of options to heal ourselves. But back then, nobody knew. And everyone was just surviving. So, and I think that from that experience, especially as a child, where nothing was really explained to me, I had to process everything myself or not process it or numb it. There's a trickle down effect, right? So if, let's say, the parents' dynamic, they didn't know what to do, there was a lack of love, or there was a lack of physical affection, or just affection in general in the household. Looking back, there were so many tools that my parents could have used and worked on if only they were open to learning about it and working on the relationship, right? I don't even think they tried. So then that trickles down to the offspring, the next generation, how I grew up, what I witnessed, conflicts, how conflict was managed and dealt with. And now when I do the work that I do, I understand my why, because the amount of finances, of resources, of time and energy that I have spent on my healing and improving the way that I relate to others, like that amount of money and time and effort and energy could have been reduced if only my parents had the tools to process their relationship. And I'm not saying that, when couples aren't happy with each other, that they have to work on it and stick together and not go through the divorce. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is there are definitely tools that we can have and we can gain that will help mitigate all the trauma that you're passing on to your children and your children's children, and etc. Okay. So now as an adult, many years later, looking back, I think, wow, there's so many things that they could have done, we could have done as a family as well. I have an older sister. We could have done as a family to really just be better people and know how to process difficult situations, learn how to grieve, learn how to feel, learn how to respond wisely rather than reacting with teenage angst, you know? And so when I see my clients now, most of my clients come to me not because there's a problem, by the way, but most of my clients come to me because they want to grow and learn about themselves and about their partners and how to relate better. And my job is to give them tools. So when we look at the big picture of what we can do as humans, as parents, as daughters, as sons, as people who were meant to relate to one another, it's about gaining the tools and the experience and also the insights of what can help us relate better with others and ourselves. And I think most of the time when I am working with people is I get so many amazing insights, qualitative data from people who tell me their deepest, most vulnerable secrets that sometimes they don't even tell their therapists or their partners even. And so when I gather all this qualitative data, I see the patterns that show up. Then if you look at the patterns and if you don't work on those toxic traits or those things that are deteriorating the relationship, it might be okay for a year or two. Some people even can live with it 10 years down the road. But then you grow further and further and further apart and you don't talk about it. And then many things happen. And then the children have to kind of deal with it as an adult. And everything happens for a reason, right? But I'm just saying that, you can cut the pain and you can mitigate these risks of grieving, of maybe separation, to have the right tools to heal for yourselves and for your offspring. So some of the main patterns I see with people when it comes to relating is not being able to talk about or communicate what's bothering them without being defensive and without it being a conflict. So I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable with speaking about intimacy. So a lot of times the first thing that goes is intimacy in a long-term relationship, right? And when I say intimacy, I don't mean just the actual sex. I mean, it could be the cuddling, it could be the pillow talk, it could be making out, it could be longer hugs, vulnerability, because intimacy is into me, you see. So even just shutting down, not wanting to be vulnerable with their partner, this is really what I see as the main thing, is the lack of communication, or the discomfort with being vulnerable in communicating intimately. The second thing that I see that is a pattern that can be resolved very easily is the fact that people are uncomfortable with feeling feelings. Okay. So a lot of times we go through emotions like sadness, like grief, like anger, like frustration, annoyance, everything under the sun. And we don't know how to process it, or we numb it with alcohol, with stimulation like the phone, with drugs, with any other substance. It could also be distracting yourself by being busy. So I see a lot of people who don't sit with the discomfort, because if you learn to sit with the discomfort and with those really hard feelings, you tend to realize that everything is impermanent. And that's also one of the key teachings of certain meditation practices like Vipassana. It's the art of impermanence, right? The only thing that is constant is change. The third thing that I see that people struggle with in relationships is not listening to each other. I mean, if you watched my TEDx talk, the main theme is really about learning how to listen. Sometimes we are hearing the other person, but when you're hearing, it doesn't mean that you're actually listening to them and holding space for them. You might be hearing them, and then while you're hearing them, you're also thinking about how you can defend yourself and how you can prove that you're not a bad person, right? Because the other person might be blaming you. It might be might be quite finger pointy, and it's not a great feeling. So learning how to listen to one another and also reflect back on what you're hearing is a really important tool to learn in how to relate better with others at the workplace as well. I'm not even just talking about in your personal relationships, and definitely with your kids, and absolutely with your friends. Okay? People you care about, basically. Learn how to listen and speak less. And the fourth most common thing, I'm actually just thinking about it on the fly because, again, this is unscripted. The fourth most common thing that I see that people make in terms of mistakes in relationships, I think would be not seeing one another, and also negative self-talk. I hear this a lot, actually. So they kind of go hand in hand. So not seeing one another is like your partner comes home, or maybe someone comes home and you might be on the phone, and you're going to continue to be on the phone, but you maybe look up and just go, hey, and you go back to your phone, right? Whereas when you're seeing the other person, it could be that person walks in, you put the phone down, you get up, you give them a big hug or a big kiss and just welcome them home. That is an example of seeing someone. And I say that this goes hand in hand, seeing and negative self-talk, is a lot of times when we don't love ourselves. And when I say we don't love ourselves, what I mean is if you had a recording and you jotted down everything that you had in your mind and all of the negative things that come up, like all the criticism you have about your face, your body, everything, how you look and how successful or not successful you are. We often, even if our partner or someone tries to give us love and affection, we tend to shut down, we tend to deflect, we tend to contract, and we move away. Okay, so this is why I say in order to feel fully seen, you have to fully see yourself. And I think not a lot of people fully see themselves in a positive light. And there's always this inner voice that comes up, and that could be one of our shadows. So I think those four major things is definitely what I see with relationships that start to deteriorate and continue to deteriorate. And sometimes when you wait too long to try to repair, the longer you wait, the more difficult it is to repair. Okay, this is what I see. So I always say when you have the right tools and you know how to use them in the moment, because the biggest lesson is when you're using these tools in the moment, when you're about to react, when you're about to defend, when you're about to shut down, when you're about to avoid, right? When you have the tools of mindful intimacy and the things that I show my clients and we practice, it makes a world of a difference. And I've seen clients go from having zero intimacy for years, like let's say 3 years plus, to having intimacy every day, from not even hearing each other to now having a loving check-in every week and being fully safe, feeling fully safe and comfortable and embracing each other, to clients not being able to have a child, right? Because a lot of it is also emotional when you are trying to connect with one another. The physical, the mental, the emotional, when there is emotional stress, when the cortisol is high, when your nervous system is in its parasympathetic, when your nervous system is in your sympathetic and you want to be in your parasympathetic, your body is not going to be like, hello, I'm ready to have a baby. So I see clients who are trying to have children, when they cannot have children, to being fertile and having babies. It's the world of a difference. So all in all, I think my why, my story that I just spilled out, my why is really to save a lot of relationships. And I have saved many, many marriages and many, many relationships. And this is why I do what I do, because what I see the difference day and night. And if we just learned a few key things and we can practice those few key things, and sometimes it takes a third party from an objective standpoint to really point things out to you, and that can help mitigate and eliminate all of the trauma, drama, grieving that you need to go through, and maybe your children will need to go through the process of the separation. I mean, if we can eliminate that and have a more calm and peaceful and abundant world of love, why not, right? So, yeah, that's my story. I mean, there's a lot more. So maybe I'll do more of these unscripted videos and make it more raw, I guess. There's a lot of things that I can speak about. So stay tuned and follow along on this journey. Chat soon.